Good morning, and welcome to the Canadian Family Offices panel on the changing face of philanthropy in Canada today. I'm Joe Chidley, Managing Editor of Canadian Family Offices, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. But before we introduce our very impressive panel of experts, a couple of housekeeping items. First, unfortunately, panelist David O'Hayan of the Jewish Community Foundation of Montreal has been called away to attend to a last-minute emergency, and he'll be unable to join us today. He sends his sincere regrets, and we wish him all the best. Second, for our audience members, if you encounter any technical difficulties during today's discussion, please feel free to press the handy-dandy help button on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, and someone will provide you with some help right away. Okay, that's it. Nice short housekeeping stuff. And with that out of the way, let me introduce our expert panel. Anil Gokhale is Director of Philanthropy at the Toronto Foundation, where he counsels individuals, multi-generational families, and professional advisors on philanthropic solutions, including donor-advised funds and private foundations. He loves connecting donors to the community, and he has helped make Toronto Foundation the youngest and most diverse community foundation in North America by bringing in over 250 young fund holders through a philanthropic MBA learning journey. Next, Karen Sparks is Director of Philanthropic Advisory Services at BMO Private Wealth. She joined BMO Wealth Management in 2011 following progressively senior roles in the financial services industry, specializing in wealth planning, marketing, and communications, and business development. Today at BMO Private Wealth, she advises high net worth families and business owners on comprehensive wealth planning solutions as part of an integrated team of wealth consultants and in-house technical specialists. She helps clients articulate and understand their unique objectives for accumulated wealth and acts as a value-add resource for investment advisors and their clients, providing a blueprint from which to execute a customized and optimized wealth plan that includes philanthropy. Nadia Wandowski is Vice President, Leadership and Corporate Giving at the Canadian Cancer Society. Nadia is a seasoned philanthropy executive with over 12 years of experience in major gift fundraising, strategic philanthropy, and partnership development. As Vice President, Leadership and Corporate Giving at the Canadian Cancer Society, she leads a national team driving major transformational and planned giving, working closely with high net worth individuals, ultra high net worth individuals, and family foundations. Next up is Ron Birnbaum, founder and CEO of Pear Tree Canada. Ron's a tax lawyer by profession, and he founded Pear Tree in 2007 as an extension of his and his wife's volunteerism. After he secured from the Canada Revenue Agency an advanced income tax ruling for what is referred to as the flow-through share donation platform. That platform combines two well-established tax incentives to reduce the after-tax cost of giving down to less than 10 cents on the dollar of donation. Now, almost 20 years later, over $4 billion of flow-through share financings have been sourced for donation, and Pear Tree has moved from what was once thought of as a cutting-edge tax structure to a mainstay in tax-effective philanthropic giving and resource finance. And Pear Tree also acts as a trusted partner and advisor to charities, government, and broadly to the high net worth community. So that's it for the introductions. Welcome everybody today, and let's get to the questions. And I think we'll start by setting a bit of context about the state of giving in Canada today, with a somewhat alarming and depressing statistic that shows that fewer Canadians are giving to charity every year. Only about 17%, that's less than 1 in 5 tax filers, donated to charity in 2022. And that number has been declining for more than a decade. So my first question to you, because you're all connected or work in the philanthropic community, why is this happening? Anil, do you want to go first?
Sure, yeah. And Joe, thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity. And it's an absolute pleasure to be part of this discussion with my fellow panelists. Um, like the numbers are true. People across all income brackets have been giving less and less for years. And it's had an enormous impact on the charitable sector. At Toronto Foundation, we've been tracking this decline for over 20 years through Toronto's Vital Signs, our research that we do. And what we do know is that people who are generally less involved in their community also tend to give less. The more people are involved with groups, the more they give. And as a society, we're increasingly less connected to one another. We're more isolated, and this has had huge implications on charitable giving. It's a problem because the needs are going up while the support is going down. Community-based organizations providing our fundamental support system are facing unprecedented demand but services for their services, but also persistent declines in donations. In Toronto alone, 30% of Toronto nonprofits report declining revenue from individual donations as recently as 2024. So the way I see it, it really is connected to that whole notion of we're joining less, we're being a part of things less, and ultimately that's just sort of it's a decline in our connection to community, and it manifests itself through donations as well as volunteerism. So that's kind of one piece I'd like to add to this discussion.
If I can just add one obvious piece, and that is times have gotten a lot tougher over the last 10 years. People just have less to give away. I mean, there isn't, in many instances, people who had some disposable income that they would share no longer have that disposable income. I think I think that's something we just all recognize as sort of an assumption, but it's worth stating that times are much tougher. And to the extent that the charities are now an extension of social services, you're right, the demand is higher. It's an infill for failure of government to provide those services that otherwise are being provided by charities. So it's unfortunate.
Nadia, Karen, any thoughts on that trend?
Sure. I would piggyback on what was just said to say that I think it's, there's a lot of external factors that are contributing to this, as we see perhaps even more so on the daily. But there is a tremendous amount of economic uncertainty out there. So with things like the cost of living, inflation, and other determinants, making that disposable income lesser and lesser for more and more Canadians, it is affecting their decisions around their philanthropy and just how much they can engage in that kind of behavior.
Okay. Yeah. And I guess, Karen, do you have anything to add or?
Just concur with what Ron said. I think it's pressure on families just to look after themselves first.
Yeah.
But that said, in the high net worth and uber high net worth transformational gift sector, that subsector, I think people are stepping up all the more and giving away all more. I mean, they're passionate about their causes and they have the ability to make those donations. And notwithstanding what the next 3 or 4 years of uncertainty will bring us with the U.S., I think that community continues to address problems and come up with structured donations that are remarkable.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that kind of leads to my, sorry, go ahead, Anil. Yeah.
So I was just going to build on those last 2 points. I would say the challenge though is, and so I would echo folks kind of at that ultra high net worth level. And I think a lot of the folks that would be on this call representing family offices and kind of in this world are connected to these kinds of high net worth, ultra high net worth Canadians. When we're going down the road of setting up private foundations or donor advised funds, we're setting these structures in place and where we've got the money in these funds that now can be distributed to community. I think sometimes the challenge though is that I mean, the trends in Canada are that a really high percentage, over 60%, nearly 70% of donations in this country go to 1% of the charities. And they tend to go to the biggest institutions time and time again. And it is the community level where when we talk about people struggling and the cost of living, the people relying on food banks, on shelters, that's where the need truly is. And a lot of the big transformational gifts don't find themselves going into those corners of the sector. And so it's kind of this compounding effect that tends to happen, unfortunately, in the way charitable giving is happening today.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I think maybe we'll get into that a little bit later too, about where's the money going, right? Where's the interest now among philanthropic dollars, where they're being directed? And this brings up, and Ron and everyone brought up a good point that, the burden of giving, for lack of a better phrase, is increasingly falling on the high net worth, wealthy, affluent groups within society. I think there's a stat out there that the top 1% of earners in Canada account for nearly 40% of overall donations. They tend to be older, and not only wealthier, but older. And I'm wondering for Nadia and Anil in particular, how has this changed the way you go about fundraising or programming as charitable organizations? Like, what are the challenges here? What are the opportunities you see in that trend?
Speaking on behalf of the Canadian Cancer Society and the work that we've done, we have had to shift along with the times and where we're seeing the trends now. As you say, with an increased sort of burden on high net worth and ultra high net worth individuals that are supporting greater disbursement of philanthropic dollars, we have adjusted our programming alongside that. So we have put an increased or enhanced effort around our major giving operations. That means having larger staff, having a presence that is, coast to coast to coast, where we can work with these people in a way that is meaningful for them. Having that engagement, to Anil's point earlier, is incredibly important for every organization, where we see that these donors are really wanting to get intimately involved in the work that they are impacting directly. So whether that means working together on co-creating new ideas, new programs, and new initiatives, or if it's just with regards to their expectations around impact reporting, having a direct line of sight or even a direct relationship with the recipients and the beneficiaries of their philanthropy, we're seeing is becoming more and more important. So as an organization, it's important for us to be able to make those changes, to be nimble, to be responsive to what it is that they're looking to do and how they're looking to seek to get involved with their philanthropy.
Okay. Anil, any thoughts on that question with the shift towards wealthy donors? How does that affect the way you go about raising money and programming and communicating?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that a little bit, Joe. So Toronto Foundation is one of 200 community foundations, 200 plus community foundations across the country. Karen represents BMO, and BMO, as well as many of the other banks and financial institutions, offer donor advised funds as well. And then our panelist, David, who's not here, from the Jewish Community Foundation, community foundations within other ethnic diasporas also have donor advised funds. So all to say, there's, a lot of options for high net worth Canadians to structure their giving. And of course, there's the private foundation route, and a donor advised fund tends to be kind of the alternative in that camp. So all that said, when we think about high net worth Canadians and those that are in positions to give larger gifts at sort of more transformational times, maybe tied to moments of liquidity, structures like a donor advised fund or a private foundation are a great initial vehicle for that person or that family. Then it's sort of connecting the dots to actually help them make impact at the local level to support important organizations like the Canadian Cancer Society, where Nadia works, and so many others across the country. I think that the point I made earlier about, the fact that a lot of money tends to go to a certain swath of organizations, that unfortunately just continues to happen. And so, many larger organizations are staffed up and know how to work with major gift donors, talk about planned giving, think about many of these ideas, and they're structured, and they have the right tactics, and they're, while giving is down, like there's still, we see the headlines of the really big gifts on the cover of the Globe and Mail, or the huge campaigns that are being outlined at, major institutions. So like that culture is there. What we're not seeing, though, is that connection down at the next level. And so I think this is where organizations like community foundations can really be a translator for a lot of families to sort of connect their charitable intent to on the ground actual, good that they can do. And it's research like Toronto's Vital Signs and it's local United Ways across the country that provide a lot of really important data. in Ontario, I would recommend folks to look at the Ontario Trillium Foundation. Every year they publish all of the organizations that they've granted to. And, they do really important work to kind of go into these organizations and understand what they're doing and then share that data. Because again, these are all resources that help Canadians find the organizations that they want to connect to. And so that's sort of how I would look at that, Joe.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Anil. Karen, Ron, from your perspective, how are, like, when we look at ultra high net worth, and family offices, how are philanthropic goals and strategies being integrated at that level? Like, how important are they to to the overall approach and operations? And where's that going?
Karen? You wanna go
Yeah,
first?
I would say that most of our ultra high net worth families already have a foundation or a donor advised fund in place. So our job is to help them, first of all, give it efficiently. And this is overlapping on what Ron does, grow it exponentially and grant it effectively. And I do want to touch on the granting piece because that's a large part of what we do. As we see clients' philanthropic wealth grow, we want to make sure that they have long-term granting plans where they can see some effectiveness with their philanthropy. And very often this involves future generations. So we are seeing a generational shift between G1 and G2, or even sometimes G2 and G3. And we're seeing how younger generations are taking a different approach to the philanthropy than the matriarch and patriarch did. A lot of the younger generation is concerned about the community issues that we're facing today, such as homelessness and food insecurity and youth mental health and the environment. Some of the bigger issues that require a bigger commitment to see an impact with.
Yeah, that's interesting. Ron, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, basically, though, I mean, we've touched on the donor advised fund approach, and certainly that's been the big trend, and the bigger trend within the donor advised fund world is the fact that foundations are now allowing a high net worth financial advisor to continue to manage the funds, even though they're housed within the foundation. And that's been a game changer. I think if the Jewish Community Foundation of Montreal is a good example where 15 years ago when I met them, there was about 125 under admin. Today they've got 2.4 billion, 2.3, 2.4 billion, but about 1/7 of that is run by the high net worth, the family office advisor PMs directly, even though it's housed within a tax-free account, basically. That's one trend, but the other one is that I think maybe that's across all business and philanthropy is, even though we're talking about donor advised funds, everybody the first call almost always is to their tax advisor, and whether that means also things such as insurance or the sort of the or other kind of private company share structures that can be put into place. I mean, we work alongside our high net worth community and family offices and charities and campaigns all the time.
Mhm.
We're one tool in the toolbox. There's probably 8 or 9 of them that are there. Actually, we have about 8 or 9 hours of courseware on our website. So if our tool works, great, but sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's certainly not the full solution. But certainly the tax advisor is now pretty well the first call by anyone who's thinking of a major gift. And I think the Karen's group and Nadia and Neil, I mean, everybody recognizes that the tax advisor is at the table from the beginning as opposed to afterwards.
Hmm. Yeah, because tax is yeah, go ahead, Neil. Yeah, please.
I just really want to build on that point. I think it's important. And sort of the point that I'm going to probably keep coming back to is this idea of just really promoting and building that culture of giving, right? And of course we want donors thinking that way, but the four of us know, and many folks on this call know, that the tax advisors, the professional advisors, they're the folks that are often the gateway to these families, right? And for a lot of us, they are kind of the extension of our work. And so the more we can inspire them, the more we can educate them to really know that these options exist and know what's possible, it will then kind of filter down to their clients. And to Karen's point, the multi-generational families, if advisors are only having conversations with G1 in a family, they're really going to miss out, because as soon as G2 or G3 starts asking questions and they don't have that relationship, they're going to look elsewhere and they're going to find the information they're looking for in other corners. And so it's really critical for advisors to be thinking about what relationships are they building and maintaining and growing with future generations and families. And that also applies to not just having the relationship with generally, and I'm generalizing here, but the patriarch of a family, but thinking about the matriarch as well, and because we all know, right, in terms of the wealth, in terms of what word am I looking for?
Wealth transfer.
Wealth transfer, thank you. It goes often first from patriarch to matriarch and then to next generation. And so we really need to be thinking about how this all plays out, especially in very affluent Canadian families.
And women are driving more and more philanthropy these days. Women have a different approach to philanthropy than men do. Not that men are not philanthropic, it's just women tend to have a different focus. They tend to be more strategic in their giving, and they like to use philanthropy to teach their children the value of wealth.
So you're saying that women are more attuned to sort of some of the generational issues
they tend to be more, instead of one-off gifts, they tend to be more thoughtful in terms of planning longer-term gifts, involving family members in philanthropic decisions. We see that a lot with women. They say they just don't want to hand money over to their children. They want to teach their children the value of money and the value of being in a society like Canada where there is such tremendous wealth, and some are more privileged than others.
That's interesting. And you also brought, this talk of the intergenerational wealth transfer and the impact on philanthropy and how it's changing. Let's unpack that a little bit now before we get into the other very important topic, which is taxes. How right now, the broad picture is that wealthy older people account for a lion's share of giving in this country. And that wealth will eventually, and actually quite soon, I think over the next 10, 15, 20 years, be transferred to the next generation, at least in some cases to the third generation. Are younger Canadians as committed, as engaged in philanthropy in this cohort as their parents, as the older generations? What's your sense?
I think everybody's afraid to say. I think everybody's sense is less so than more so.
Really?
I think so.
Why do you say that, Ron?
I just think we see it in I think the driving force, as Karen set out, it's the patriarch, then to the matriarch, and then to the kids, and the challenge is to get the kids, to have the same kind of commitment. I think in some families it's built in. The kids are focused on philanthropic causes. I can think of one instance where one of our clients has their 5, 7-year-old, 8-year-old in one of the donor advised funds that are technologically enabled, and they're giving away $5 a week as part of their allowance, and they're making their choices even though they're little kids. But generally, I think certainly across all groups, I think we've actually seen the comment made by lots of charities that the next gen and just more challenged and as Anil said, more isolated in terms of how people carry on their lives now. So it's just a trend that we've noticed.
And that's a big part of what we do, though, is try to educate that next generation for the point where they do take over, where they do have that decision authority. And to your point, it does often reside with the matriarch or patriarch. But once they're gone, and this is where I think we're about to face an interesting challenge, because I think that with estate plans, money is going to be pushed more into philanthropy when the second spouse dies. And these foundations and donor advised funds are going to become exponentially larger in just through estate planning. And then that future generation is going to have to manage that. So that's what we're trying to work with is let's try and engage the next generation now while mom and dad are still alive so that they're prepared to take over when mom and dad are no longer here.
Nadia, you're about to say something there.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I suppose looking at it in two different ways. If we think about younger generations, to Ron's point earlier, I think we are seeing definitely that there is less giving, or that they tend to donate in smaller amounts, but smaller amounts sometimes even more frequently, sometimes changing how they engage. So whether they're really looking beyond into more non-traditional forms of philanthropy, such as crowdfunding, social enterprise, or advocacy. And we see that there's a lot of interest as well for that engagement and volunteer piece. So we have been at the Canadian Cancer Society really thinking about this in an intentional way, thinking about how we can engage with youth, young professionals, recent grads, to really build a comprehensive strategy to make that philanthropy meaningful for them, and also to keep them involved for a longer period of time, because we do see that younger generations do not necessarily have the same staying power, if you will, or that same long-term affinity with a particular charity. So they may change or decide to distribute their philanthropy across multiple different focuses or priorities in a different sense too.
Okay. I know.
Yeah, I definitely want to jump in here. So many great points shared by my co-panelists. So I've got sort of everything's firing in a lot of directions right now. So I'll try to go through it. For sure, the numbers are so you know the 17% stat that you shared off the top. You did specifically say tax filing, and I think it's important to talk about that, right? Because Nadia just touched on crowdfunding. I think we've seen the rise in the GoFundMe's, right? And that kind of stuff. And none of that is a tax receipted donation, but a lot of that is people helping other people that are in need. And for sure, younger generations are giving more through vehicles like that, through the crowdsourcing way, than sort of a traditional, $100 donation to a charity that they're going to get a tax receipt for. The other point that's, I think, important to just really say out loud is, the same way young people think about their Spotify subscription, their Netflix subscription, a lot of things are monthly, and there is a lot of focus on monthly giving that tends to happen, and it's $5, $8, $10 a month, but it adds up, and it's a way for charities, I think, to get more sort of constant support, which is really nice. And once people set those monthly donations up, they tend to kind of forget about them. And, the only time it really comes up again is maybe when their credit card expires and they have to re-up or something. But otherwise, it's a great tactic to try to get young people in particular started to think about donations earlier. And then the one other thing I wanted to talk about was the work we've done at Toronto Foundation around engaging young people. You mentioned in my intro that, and humble brag here, but we are the youngest and most diverse community foundation in North America now. And that's really as a result of a lot of work we've been doing since about 2017-18, where we really actually created what we called a philanthropic MBA. And the idea was folks can set up a donor advised fund for as little as $10,000. And then it's not just a transactional thing where they're setting up their fund and then, they pick a charity or two every year to give to from their fund, but they're actually learning about the philanthropic sector. They're understanding their own values. They're understanding about impact investing. They're meeting executives at organizations to understand how these organizations work, what the data is telling them. And all of this stuff, I think, is really important. It's a new way that younger people want to be engaged by charities. And I think younger people are looking for things like collaboration more. So they want to see charities actually working together. I was just on Instagram the other day and I saw that the Jays Care, so the Toronto Blue Jays charity, they hosted an event 2 weeks ago at the Rogers Center. I'll still always call it Skydome. They hosted an event there where who they brought in was an organization called First Book Canada. And on the entire 100 level, there were just stalls and stalls and stalls of books, and they invited teachers from across Ontario to come and take these books and bring them to the education to their classroom. And it was a way to show a collaboration between a sports youth charity and then this reading charity. And you start seeing more collaborations like that I think are really important. And so young people want to see that kind of collaboration and charities working together more.
So I'm hearing you say that young people want to see the creativity and flexibility in programs and from their charities as they kind of demand in the rest of their life, right? And convenience on top of it. Yeah. Okay. Getting back to like wealthy families in particular, Ron and Karen, how can they, you've talked, Karen, a bit about, transferring and kind of educating younger generation about philanthropy. How does that, can you unpack that a little bit? How does that work?
Yeah, we have a process where we take families through an exercise that helps them articulate what their values are. And so we interview family members individually and then try to find a common focus within the family so that they can at least work together as a unit. We also encourage matriarchs and patriarchs to allow some flexibility in their granting, where they're not judging what the next generation is choosing, allows them some freedom in doing it. But the main thing for us is to help them understand how to increase their granting over a period of time. So we have foundations now that maybe are at the $5 million mark, and within a few years they could be at $100 million. And so, granting a percentage of the foundation at 5 million is different from 100 million, and how to ratchet up their granting plans. So we do work on creating multi-year granting plans for families and encouraging them to find something to really focus on, as opposed to just doing a grant to an operating charity. So instead of giving $5,000 a year to an organization, what if you committed to $25,000? What would that look like? And we very often are an intermediary between the family and the charity to help them come up with things that they can fund on an effective basis.
Okay, great, thank you.
Certainly, what we see, excuse me, a lot of, and we're talking about patriarch and matriarch, and I'll add the word overbearing patriarch. So quite often the founder of the family firm will want an agenda that's far more aggressive than the kids or the grandkids. And so the donor advised fund is then funded up as part of the estate plan, or it's funded up as a result of liquidity events that have happened. A lot of money went into donor advised fund before June 25th of last year, when people thought that capital gains inclusion rate would go up, and that drove a behavior where a lot of people triggered some of those gains, and a lot of those gains were triggered for philanthropic purposes. So that was a good thing. But we're seeing a lot of our clients fund up in advance of their own death. One of our tools in the toolbox is we're able to carry forward certain expenses into exploration expenses in the terminal year return to offset deemed dispositions on death. And we've had many clients in the last 15 or 17 years that have said, I'm donating now based on the tax I'd otherwise have to pay in that terminal year return, and much of it goes into the donor advised fund. And so, I think the older generation are time, and to the extent that the kids and the grandkids have then inherit the advisory role in the donor advised fund, they may not fund more money into that fund, but they certainly is the corpus of the fund that's accumulating income and being dispersed out, 5 to 10% a year, depending upon their agendas. But so it's both ends. It's the patriarch, and it's also the kids and the grandkids.
Right. So it's not just what you're saying, and I think, Aaron, you've said this too, it's not just the kids getting the money and then deciding where it goes. They will be in charge of these large foundations or donor advised funds.
Exactly.
And that becomes an education issue, and also, I suppose, a family governance issue as well.
Exactly. So how do we enable them to have those skills to carry on when mom and dad are no longer here.
And if I can just add one cynical comment, it's also the as part of that generational transfer, it also means that the advisor to the family, whether it's the family office or the advisor within one of the banks, now has a passionate conversation with the next gen that now has the money. I mean, it's cynically a way of managing your client's money beyond their death, but and also that stickiness with the next gen. People in our world, everybody talks about money and returns and yields, but in our world, it's more about passion. We don't talk about our clients' businesses as much as their desire to help others and getting their kids involved later. And one way of doing it is to just tie up lots of money as part of the estate plan.
I just want to build off that. I think it's important as well. We've mentioned a few times kind of these, large foundations, large donor advised funds. Ron's comment about, last year or earlier this year, or no, last year with crystallizing capital gains and whatnot. Like I think all these strategies are there, and new strategies will come up, and there's lots of the advisors that are kind of in these camps are always figuring out these things and turning to their clients and giving them options. I want to reframe our thinking and get us also remembering it's one thing to talk about the size of our foundation and how big, $100 million, $10 million, whatever, but let's also start talking more about the actual size of the gift going out and the money actually going into community. I think that's really important too, because when it's sitting in a donor advised fund or sitting in a private foundation, that's a big amount of money that's already been tax receipted, but it's actually not doing any good yet. And so I think it's really important to make sure that, teams like Karen's, teams like mine, are having those discussions with our families, having those values conversations, educating, providing that information, because ultimately, like just having the money sit in these vehicles is not helpful. Like it's helpful to the family because they got their tax stuff sorted, but it's not helpful for Canadians that and the environment and all these things that are really struggling. And so I think, I just really want to make sure we kind of don't lose sight of that. And I think I'm sure Nadia will have some comments there as working at an organization herself.
Yeah, definitely. I can I concur with everything that you're saying, and I think that it's so important, and it's really exciting to hear that at every touch point and engagement that we're having with these donors, with these high net worth individuals and ultra high net worth families as well, that we're really having a conversation around building awareness and educating them about not only giving vehicles and how they can engage from a tax perspective with their philanthropy, but also about how they engage and the impact that they want to have within their communities or with regards to a specific cause. And as we're thinking about too, that generational transfer of wealth and the decision making that goes along with it, that awareness, that conversation piece is all the more important, because I think what we're starting to see too is an emergence around almost an intersectionality that's happening, where the values shift is happening. So where there may have been previously a strong sense of loyalty or affinity to particular organizations or institutions that were just many years long, we're seeing new generations come through with an interest around values that might intersect around social justice, for example, or environment and other places. And it really necessitates having a broader conversation about how we can come together and do the very best to impact these areas and these causes that have great need as well.
So how do you approach that as Canadian Cancer Society? How do you approach that challenge with, diversifying interests, moving away from, perhaps traditional donation targets?
I think, what we're seeing is definitely an interest and a shift around sort of strategic philanthropy. So again, thinking about how people want to be most effective with their philanthropy, not only from a tax perspective, but with the impact that they're having. And I think this was mentioned earlier, but what we're seeing at the Canadian Cancer Society is that there's a more hands-on and interactive approach with our donors and the work that we're doing. So as an organization, we have had to become very nimble in adjusting and working with our donors. So again, engaging in conversations early on, bringing them front and center with our program managers and our executive teams to really think about what the potential of a new project or enhancing some of the work that we're doing might have, based on that shared and sort of intersection that we have between their desires, motivations, to what they want to achieve through their philanthropy, as well as us as an organization where we see the need as it relates to the cause itself. We also are looking at things like providing more bespoke opportunities. So whether that's bespoke opportunities through naming and recognition opportunities, but even from an impact perspective. So telling the story a little bit differently, talking about how we're accelerating groundbreaking research or improving patient support, for example, driving policy change in a way that couldn't be done otherwise without their support.
I can just add one comment about policy change, and that is there's been a lot of discussion at finance over the last few years about disbursement quotas. And I mean, it did go up to 5% not that long ago. There's at least one for sure major donor family foundation where the second generation has said to government very directly, and also in the press in an op-ed in the Globe Mail about a year and a half ago, that donor advised funds and family foundations should self-liquidate over 18 or 20 years, 21 years, and be done with it. And that, you know, this dynastic control of large funds ought to end. And I think we'll probably see some movement, irrespective of the next government. I think you'll see some movement in disbursement quota, and maybe specifically disbursement quota for the donor advised fund, and more granularly with respect to each of those donor advised funds within the larger organization having a disbursement quota, like ledger card by ledger card. I think that's inevitable. I think it's going to happen, if not now, or certainly over the next 3 or 4 years.
It's a really, really important point, Ron. Thanks for bringing that up. And just for the benefit of the audience, I think just to be really clear about some of the distinctions. So private foundations, when you go the route of setting one up with a lawyer and registering with the CRA and everything, you're actually quite public, right? Because any of us can go to the CRA website, we can search up a family foundation if we know the name of it, we can see who's on the board, where they give, what the trends have been, because they have to file T3010s every year. When you set up an account or a fund at a donor advised fund, like at a community foundation or with BMO or another organization, you're actually quite private, even though you've set up at a public foundation. And so that next level of like for people or to know what's in a donor advised fund, it does not exist right now. And so it sort of is a selling feature, let's say, of a donor advised fund provider. But to Ron's point, you know, these things can change from time to time. And you know, we've seen the change with the disbursement quota from 3.5% to 5%. There probably will be other changes down the road, but I think it's important just to sort of identify some of those distinctions as well as people are considering their options.
Right. What would the impact be of a move towards higher disbursement? And Ron, are you talking about mandated wind down of a private?
That was actually the one of our clients commented in an op-ed that there should be just a mandatory self-liquidating, 21 years late, like a trust. It basically just closes up in 21 years. But certainly I know that at finance there's been a lot of discussion, whether we'll have to see about the next government, but there was a lot, federal finance, there was a lot of discussion about increasing the disbursement quota for foundations and donor advised funds. And
I guess if that were to occur, then there would be impacts on philanthropy planning, estate planning.
But there'd be more money going to to Anil's point, there'd be more money going to social causes.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, the largest foundation in the country is what? It's MasterCard.
MasterCard,
Still MasterCard. That was right, which was part of the deal when they opened up in Canada, that a certain percentage would go into philanthropic causes, but they set up their own foundation, and I think they use it largely for non-Canadian philanthropy, right? Which is unfortunate. I think that's a different policy discussion we could have over a much longer webinar.
Yeah. Okay, good. Let's and I think it's a really valuable, Anil and others, that you brought up the fact that the impact is what this really is all about at the end of the day. But tax is still an important consideration, both from a personal point of view and from a public policy point of view as well, because I think we want to encourage people to give for impact as well. And there have been recently, as you all know, and our audience will know, some tax policy changes over the past couple of years, and some almost tax policy changes that may be coming and may not be coming, that have certainly had an impact on philanthropy. So I'm talking in particular, of course, about the alternative minimum tax and the proposed capital gains tax changes, which I think will now maybe be implemented next year. What's been the sort of net result of, or the net impact of these changes over the past year or so? Are people giving more, giving less, differently? What's been the, now we've had some time to digest what it all means. What is it?
Definitely the changes have accelerated some giving, shall we say. Hopefully now that will calm down a bit. But it still comes down to what is right for the family, and what do they want to do to represent their values. And I think that in the end, tax changes will come and go, but people will still want to give and set up their foundation or their donor advised fund and create a legacy through giving.
Okay. All right. So you're saying, yeah, I mean, people are adapting.
Yeah, I mean, there was initial panic when the changes were first announced, but that required, an education with clients to see how they were actually going to be impacted. And a lot of clients, as a financial planner, I rarely talked about alternative minimum tax before the changes were announced. It was usually in the context of a business sale, and especially when it was done through a family trust and there were multiple family members that were, say, minors, and all of a sudden would be faced with alternative minimum tax. Those are usually the context in which we had conversations about alternative minimum tax. And then when the government announced their changes, all of a sudden everybody was concerned that they were going to be subject to alternative minimum tax. And so educating them about who was actually impacted and for how long was a big part of what we were engaged with at the time.
We ran 2 webinars after the AMT rules changed with accountants and others. Both were remarkably well attended because of the concerns. The philanthropic community did step up and lobby pretty aggressively to walk back the AMT inclusion in the calculation for donation tax credits. And they did walk back that impact somewhat, so that you could only, at one time they said you could only use 50% of your donation receipt. We ran numbers that said, here are real life situations where people would otherwise give away property, pay the capital gains tax, pay the AMT, whatever. And this year, in 2023, they would have given away a $5 million asset. In 2024, if the rules, if actually had come in as first published, people would have to write, the analysis we did, they'd have to write a check for like $800,000 to give away a $5 million asset, and people wouldn't do it. And finance understood that finally and did make some changes. Unfortunately, there were some changes that the AMT legislation last March was wrong, at least with respect to the flow-through regime, and the fixes in the August 12th changes to the legislation. But unfortunately, that legislation hasn't passed yet. So the Income Tax Act forms that CRA has just published and tax prep behind it still have it wrong with respect to you have to override the program so far. It's going to be a bit of a nightmare. And the CRA published some new forms last year, or last week rather, with respect to the T1 return and AMT. And then made a note to say, well, this isn't entirely right either. Stay tuned. It's tough to do your tax filings when you have to stay tuned. So. But certainly the capital gains inclusion rate walk back is a good thing. And to Karen's point, AMT is a big deal. And it's particularly a big deal for our sector and for the mining sector, for the exploration sector, because exploration expenses are added back into the AMT schedule. Although if the August 12 amendments are adopted, then that won't be the case anymore, which will benefit mining and exploration, especially for critical minerals, which is a good thing for Canada.
Yeah, this might be a good time for you, Ron, just to give a 10,000-foot overview of how the flow-through share platform works.
Yeah.
You bring up the mining sector. You have
Sure.
you have
Go to our
35
website. There's a
seconds.
4-minute video. Just scroll down and you'll see what it is. It's much better than I can articulate. Look, all we do is we commoditize donations. If you're generous and taxable, and if the cost of giving is less, just like any other commodity, you'll give more. But it's all very sensitive to AMT. So rather than writing a check, although there may be alternatives for a donor, but for somebody who's otherwise writing a check for, say, $100,000 or 20,000, it doesn't matter, but 100 is easier. We set up an arrangement where that donor first buys flow-through shares, accessing tax benefits associated with the exploration expense deductions that you're entitled to. That's an incentive that's been in the books since the 1970s. A moment after you've bought the shares, literally a moment later, under a deed of gift, you're donating the shares to the charities of choice or your donor advised fund. And a moment after that, the charity sells those shares. The gift acceptance policy is such that you would never, Nadia would never accept 4-month hold junior mining shares and give you a receipt, right? Because you don't know what the value of those shares are going to be 4 months out. But in our format, which CRA signed off on, is that we end up with immediate liquidity and the charities and funds on that day. And so adding 2 deductions sets of incentives together reduces the cost of giving from 50 cents on the dollar, more or less, that's down to 10 cents, less than 10 cents in Ontario, and a lot less in most provinces with additional credits, especially Quebec, where you can give away $100,000 for $2,000 after tax, which with complete buy-in by both the federal and provincial government. Is really the only way that exploration is now funded. So that's the format. It generally works for most people, but if in our in our KYC analysis, if that person, for example, if Karen has sitting there low basis shares that are otherwise that the family wishes to sell or to donate anyway, the break even's around 30%. If you're otherwise holding shares if you otherwise have low basis securities, then you don't need us, and we'll be the first to point that out to you. But that's the format.
Okay. All right. Thanks for that, Ron. Yep. Go ahead, Anil.
Yeah. So I can't add anything to that. That's Pear Tree's focus area, and they're really good at it. And so kudos for coming up with this and leading that, Ron. Just going back to your question about sort of tax policy and changes and things like that. Like I think it boggled my mind. 2 weeks ago, I was on a call with a woman who is an executive at a very large real estate company, been there for 20 plus years. And they did not know the advantage to donating appreciated securities and just that simple structure. So I'm going to stop assuming that people know this, and I just want to say out loud, for all of our viewers, just do a simple Google search. The advantage of donating appreciated securities. There's tons of forms. There's tons of ways to explain it, but basically, you avoid paying capital gains tax. And this was a policy that the Canadian government put in, probably a couple decades ago now, and it was Karen's friend at BMO, Don Johnson, who really led the setup of that many years ago. And hundreds, thousands of Canadians and charities have benefited from this policy since, and it ends up being a really great way for a lot of folks to make larger donations, especially during moments of liquidity. And so I just want folks to understand that tool is absolutely available and utilized by more and more Canadians and should be utilized. It's policy that's been put in place to incentivize more charitable giving. And so I think, something as simple as that, for a lot of the folks represented on a call like this, I think is a great way to just kind of start exercising that muscle more and more.
I'm going to build on that, and I'm going to concur that a shocking number of people are not aware about the benefits of donating publicly traded shares. But furthermore, if they can do it from a holding company where they have a high amount of passive income that's being taxed at a high rate, not only do they not pay tax on the capital gain, but 100% of the unrealized capital gain is credited to the capital dividend account, which means you can take money out of your corporation tax-free. That is another strategy that a lot of people are not aware of. And the other fact is using insurance for philanthropy. If you make the charity, such as the Cancer Society or the Toronto Community Foundation, the owner and beneficiary of the life insurance policy, you get a tax receipt for every premium payment, and you can use appreciated securities to pay those premiums. So those are some of the tactics that we talk about when we're speaking to clients about giving money effectively.
I'll jump in. Oh, go ahead.
Go on.
Yeah, I'm excited by this because absolutely there are multiple giving vehicles that people can explore, should explore, as far as thinking about ways to give in a tax efficient way, and ways to be able to have that impact that they're looking to have today and even in future. Being part of a charity myself and working on the receiving end, we're finding that it's more and more important for us and our team to be well educated, to provide, again, that education for people who don't know about these different giving strategies that can help them. But also thinking about it, I would say, from the immediate or present and what is readily available today, but also on a long term, right? And I think we just talked about this with thinking about plan giving, for example. So we see more and more donors now are exploring notions around blended giving, what we can do today through various giving strategies, whether they're utilizing a DAF or if they're giving securities, for example, but also including in their considerations things like bequests or even donations that are spread over multiple years in order to be able to mitigate potential tax impacts on their giving.
Hey, Joe, one other thing just to build on that real quick. A lot of smaller organizations may not be set up to actually receive these kinds of gifts. And this is where someone like, or an organization like Canada Helps can really be a useful support for a lot of organizations. So if anyone on this call is like, oh, the local community center that I love, I want to give to them, but they're very small, I'm not sure how they can do it. If they have a relationship with Canada Helps, that's a way to do it, or their local community foundation, right? So whether it's in Toronto or, in Sudbury or wherever it is, there are ways to get those gifts to even smaller organizations that generally aren't staffed up to do this kind of thing. There are ways for this to happen.
Right. Ron, anything to add there? I thought you were trying to get in there.
I don't think there's much more to add to that. Look at the structural piece of major donation, and it's pretty endless. I mean, to Karen's point, you donate out of a private corporation, you have 100% add to the capital dividend account. If you added another level, if the patriarch, matriarch still have pref shares outstanding under their estate freeze, which they do, you then redeem those shares out of the CDA that was created, and now you've reduced your estate tax on your deemed dispositions on death on those pref shares. And then it just keeps going, cascading down, like from one thing to another to another. It's actually from our perspective, it's a fun part of our business where an advisor from one of the bank will call and go, we have a liquidity event coming up. We want to do the following. What do you think? And we'll actually do those multiple analyses and go, you can use us for 10% of your giving, and the rest of it, we suggest you do it otherwise. That's not, from our perspective, that's just a added value of what we do. That's not a fee for service or anything. That's just what we do. And if they do the flow through, then we financially benefit. But otherwise, happy to help people give away more money at lower cost.
Okay, great.
And to the credit of everyone, if it's lower cost, people give away more.
Yeah.
Nobody says, I gave away $100,000 last year. It cost me 50. Now it cost me 5. I'm going to buy a bigger boat or something. It's never the case. I'm earning this amount of income. How much more can I give? And that's a trend we see across all clients going back from the beginning of the company in 2007. The genesis, by the way, of this company is Don Johnson's change in the Income Tax Act.
Right.
Because when you buy a flow-through share for $1, it's as if you paid nil. So you have a giant capital gain, even if you have You have a capital gain if you have an economic loss. That's what CRA signed off on, 2 deductions for 1 check. Very generously signed off on 2 deductions for 1 check. And that's all Don's work. And by the way, to the credit of Don Johnson, he spent 8 years lobbying the government, and generally he was on his own. Right, because the political capital that's is kept by the hospital sector. They're coming hat in hand anyway, so they weren't supporting it, but he did it on his own to the benefit of Canada, remarkably to the benefit of Canada.
Thank you, Ron. We are now rapidly approaching the end of our time here. So I'm going to ask one very quick question. You can answer yay or nay. Are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future of philanthropy in Canada right now? Anil.
Definitely optimistic.
Nadia.
Optimistic as well.
Ron.
Optimistic, but we're in for some bumps over the next 4 years.
Put you down as cautiously optimistic. Karen?
Definitely optimistic.
Okay, good to know. And
People
with
who
that,
work in philanthropy are delusionally optimistic, by the way.
Have to be.
Have to be.
Yeah, exactly.
well, that's great. Okay, thanks, guys. I see we're out of time, so we'll wrap it up here. I think we've covered a lot of really interesting territory. I hope the audience members thought so as well. We've talked about the impact of tax policy, about some of the innovative giving strategies, adapting to the ever-shifting environment, and some of the demographic shifts that might affect philanthropy and the structure of giving in the coming years. So thank you. It was enlightening for me. I hope it was enlightening for everyone attending. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to our audience members for watching and listening. By the way, we would love to hear your feedback. If you want to send an email to newsroom@canadianfamilyoffices.com with what you thought of today's presentation, we'd love to take a look at that. So thank you very much. Again, thank you, Anil. Thank you, Nadia. Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Karen. And hope to speak to you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.